Hi there. In this episode, synth lore, the Poly-800 Mark I and Mark II. I'm going to discuss my feelings about the Korg Poly-800. Compare it sonically and spec-wise to a Roland Juno-106. I'm also going to do a quick listening quiz at the end to compare the sounds of the 106 against the sounds of the 800. You can decide which sounds better and see if you can guess which one is which. As I often do, a little history. The Korg Poly-800 cost $795 when it was new. Today you can buy a Mark I for about $350 and a Mark II will set you back about $450. The Mark I was made for 2 years, from 1983 until 1985. In 1985, the Mark II was released and continued production until 1987. When I saw my first Poly-800 in 1984, I wanted to add one to my gig setup. It seemed affordable, so I started saving my pennies. By the time I could afford it, I could purchase an Akai AX80 for the same price, so I purchased the Akai instead. At the time, I also owned a Roland SH-101 with the guitar strap and the modulator grip. One reason for my interest in the Poly-800, and one reason you might have interest in it, is that it will run on batteries. It has guitar strap buttons, and I had the guitar strap from the SH-101. I had visions of me running around the stage and giving Rick, our awesome guitar player, a run for his money. Alas, it was not meant to be. I got the Akai instead and was stuck behind my keyboard rack. Here's an embarrassing picture circa 1985 with the AX80, Juno-106, and SH-101. You can see how cool Rick looks and how nerdy and uncool I look. That's Kim doing her best Pat Benatar pose and Randy on bass. Out of view is our drummer Greg, sound engineer Will, and Tim, the lighting and visual effects guy. Korg had 2 mainstream products aimed at working musicians, still available in stores in my small town when I was looking at the Poly-800. The Poly-61M and the Poly-6. The Poly-6 was priced the same as the Roland Juno-106 at $1,095. And the Poly-61M, a Poly-61 with basic note-on, note-off MIDI, was available for the same price. The 800-pound gorilla in the room was the Yamaha DX7, which I would love to have owned, but it was right around $2,000 and way beyond what I can muster. I'm going to do a synth lore episode on the DX7, but suffice to say, 1983 was cruel to analog synths with the introduction of the DX7, and that lasted for several years. Getting back to the Poly-800, let's talk about specs and features. I've already mentioned the original sales price, but that was probably its best feature. $795 for a fully polyphonic synth was in the realm of affordability in the early 80s. It has 1 or 2 oscillators per voice, but if you choose 2, you cut the polyphony from 8 to 4. The Poly-800's biggest shortcoming is its parameter granularity. I haven't heard a lot of people talk about this, so I want to explain what it is. Random access memory, RAM, was very expensive in the early 80s. Korg used very efficient engineering to cram all the parameters into less memory. The major method used was to reduce granularity of parameters to save on memory. This is true for almost every parameter on the Poly-800. There is not one parameter that has a value range of 0 to 127, which was common on most synths at the time. Filter cutoff and digital delay time have 100 values, 0 to 99. Every other parameter has 32 values or less. Several parameters, like resonance and keyboard tracking, are really shortchanged. For example, on resonance, you get 0 to 15, which is only 16 values. And on keyboard tracking, you only get 3 values, whole, half, or off. Comparing just the cutoff frequency and the resonance parameter values on the Juno-106 versus the Poly-800, you get 5 times more value combinations on the Juno. That's significant. Now the 800 has 6-stage envelope generators instead of 4, but the values are only 0 to 31. A 4-stage envelope generator on a synth like a Juno-106 has value ranges of 0 to 127. That's 4 times the range. If you compare the two synths, you're giving up the granularity of the Juno-106 for 2 more envelope stages on the Poly-800. I don't want to get into the math too much, but obviously 32 to the 6th power is a larger number than 128 to the 4th power. But most people are only going to use 4 stages of the envelope for a lot of the sounds they program. 32 to the 4th power is tiny compared to 128 to the 4th power. This is very important since envelopes can target filters and amplifiers, and granularity really means something. For the envelopes, is it worth it? 6 envelopes on the Korg versus 4 on the Juno. There may be some sounds that would benefit from 6-stage envelopes instead of 4, but many people, me included, would rather have the granularity. This is even more true for the filter section. Analog synths live and die with how the filters can shape the sound, and more granularity is better. One feature the Poly-800 has that the Juno-106 doesn't have is EQ. It's 2 parameters, bass and treble. Each can have a value of -6 to +6, and it does create a noticeable change. The effects section uses delay. It can create delay and chorus effects that are pretty good. They're not as rich as the chorus on the Juno-106, but you do get to edit some of the parameters, and the Juno-106 doesn't have delay. Some people state that you can get flanging, but I think that's a stretch. I know what they're referring to, but it's cheesy at best. Lastly, on the parameters and the math, my apologies for being nerdy, the Poly-800 does not win as far as the math is concerned. Envelopes shape filters and amplifiers, and on the Poly-800, parameters for those functions have reduced ranges compared to other synths, like the Juno-106. The Poly-800 loses the math equation, but it doesn't mean it fails as a capable synth. Let's look at some more specs. It has a 49-note keyboard. Hard to fault it at its price point back in 1983. 61 is the standard for synths, but 49 is playable. It uses a wall-wart power supply. Usually I'd call this a negative, but it has undoubtedly contributed to the reliability. Usually after 40 years, components dry up and capacitors leak. The reliability of the Poly-800 is practically legendary. It's pretty much unrivaled when it comes to 80s synths. Just ask my Juno-106 that has a voice chip that is failing again, even after the acetone procedure was done to it 8 years ago. You can also power the 800 with batteries, which as the manual states will last for 4 hours. You need 6 C-cell batteries. Battery technology has improved significantly since the 80s, so expect lithium batteries to get a lot more hours of playtime. It has tedious parameter entry, but taking a patch that is close and tweaking it is not that much work. It helps that most of the parameters don't have large ranges to scroll through. When I purchased mine used a while back, all the patches were sound design effects. I reloaded the factory patches, which are available on the internet as system exclusive files and as WAV files for tape loading. The sequencer is a lot of fun to play. It's polyphonic, step entry with 1,000-note capacity. There is a button on the front panel for advancing the steps when editing. The sequencer will sync to external MIDI clocks, which is kind of handy. There's also a parameter to have the sequence play once and end, or loop indefinitely. The Mark II has basic system exclusive dumping of patch data and sequencer data. The Mark I has tape backup and restore only, which of course you can spew to a computer and save as a WAV file, and then you're not dealing with tape degradation. It has patch advance with a pedal, but no sustain pedal, which is surprising. And as far as I know, it does not react to such information from other keyboards over MIDI. When I was making up the segments for the little short segments at the end for the quiz. I was using the Kronos as a controller and it wasn't recognizing the pedal information. It has 3 2-digit LED displays, which are big and easy to read. It has a bank hold function, a key hold and chord memory function. It has MIDI in and out, but no through. And it's not programmable so that you can change the out to a through, like you can on a lot of keyboards that only have the 2. You can set a MIDI channel from 1 to 16 and say yes or no on whether it will receive patch change information. There is no transpose function. This is surprising. Even the Juno has a transpose function and it came out a year earlier. I already mentioned about the guitar strap buttons and it runs on batteries. You can get up front on stage and trade lead lines with the guitar player. A sticker on the front panel lists all the parameters and their value ranges, which is convenient when you're programming. You won't need to have the manual open in front of you. The keys don't feel any better or worse than any of the other unweighted synths that I own. The construction is solid. Sometimes when they are for sale on eBay and Reverb, they're missing the battery compartment lid. You really want one with the lid or you'll have to use duct tape, which is what I've seen people use. The lid is about half the size of a Post-it pad. It's probably about yay big. If you're handy, you could probably 3D print one or have somebody 3D print one for you. That's really it for the specs and features. Let's see how you do on the quiz. I'm going to play you a series of audio segments. You may want to stop the video now and write down 1 through 20 in a column on a piece of paper. The segments are going to play one after another with a short space in between. There are no tricks. It's either the Juno-106 or it's the Korg Poly-800. After all the segments have played, I'll give you all the answers in a list and you can see how you did. Remember, there's no right or wrong answers here. They are both capable keyboards. In my synth lore episode on the Juno-106, I said that somebody once told me that they could separate a Roland synth, such as a Juno-106, from every other manufacturer due to the Roland filter sound. I think that this is a lot easier in this particular quiz. There's definitely a big difference between the 800 filter sound and the Juno-106 sound. Good luck. How did you do? Doesn't really matter, right? But if you're familiar with the Juno-106, I would have expected you to recognize the segments that it played. Maybe not the percussive sounds or the sound effects. Those might be difficult to distinguish, but the pads, organs, filter sweeps, those should have been obvious. Time to summarize. Is the Poly-800 a substitute for a Juno-106? Is it a poor person's 106? That's an easy question to answer, and the answer is no. It's not even close. The 106 is richer, smoother, more refined in every aspect except one: reliability. So what's the Poly-800 good for? Number one, it would make a good first classic 80s analog synth for those on a budget. Number two, it would be a great addition as a different sounding classic 80s synth to someone's arsenal who already has a bunch of synth 80s crap. That's me. And that's why I purchased it, and because I'd always wanted one. The Poly-800 sounds gritty. The Juno-106 sounds smooth. One thing to note is that the church organ sound I used in the quiz came from the 800. That would have been hard to program on the Juno because of its architecture. On the other hand, the dripping wet filter sounds you get on the Juno-106, they're not present on the Poly-800. Here's my last attempt to describe the sound. If you've ever purchased chocolate pudding at the grocery store, peeled off the lid, and tasted the creamy goodness, that's the Juno-106. If you've ever gone to an all-you-can-eat buffet and tasted chocolate pudding that is gritty, like they use powdered chocolate sand and mixed it in a 50-gallon drum in the back room, that's the Poly-800. What's your preference? Mine is to have both because they both have their uses. Now let me say this like I always do. My goal is never to steer you towards a piece of gear. I give you some facts, my opinion, examples in use, and you can make your own decision. But I'll say this, classic synths, especially those from the 80s, are going up in price. They have been for a long time. The Korg Poly-800 may be a dog with fleas, but it's an affordable, classic 80s dog with fleas. It won't be affordable forever. You might want to get some of those fleas while they're still affordable. Hopefully I haven't wasted your time. Take care, and I'll be back in another video soon.